What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is Justin Boone. Boone, what's going on, buddy?
Man, this is the final edition of the Coping Corner for this season, and we've come a long way here from me learning what the Coping Corner was at the beginning of the year, trying to wrap my head around when we could put guys in the Coping Corner and when maybe we should hold off. We've made some mistakes along the way, no doubt, but overall, I think we've given out some pretty good advice on these shows and help people maybe not overreact too often, because even today I've looked at some of the submissions we have. Like, there's a few that came in where it's just like, why are you panicking about that player? Like, we're a week off of that guy having a huge game. Like, just dial it back a notch. So I think it's a great episode that we're going to go over here. And I also think maybe because we're nearing the end of it, they're going to have a lot of guys that are going to be going in the Coping Corner this week, at least from my end. I don't know how you feel about it, but when I looked at some of the names we're going to talk about, there's a lot of these guys I want to put in the Coping Corner, Harmon.
It's going to be an interesting bunch of conversations that we're going to have here today, just for the people who are kind of like, hey, where are these knuckleheads going in terms of the panic meter show? We're just not doing the panic meter segment anymore. We are going to replace that with the fantasy trust meter next week, which essentially will just be, and I also want to do the backup running back rankings as we head into stash season for the fantasy postseason. But essentially, we're going to rework this segment into, you're not panicking anymore. You're living week by week with these fantasy playoff matchups. So who can you trust? So we're just going to rework the segment. We're not going anywhere. Boone certainly is not going anywhere. We got to get a lot more mileage out of this guy before fantasy season ends. That is for sure. But for now, we are going to address your final week of submissions to the People's Panic Meter, the final players who were freaking out on, the final players who are going into the Coping Corner. Before we do all that, we are going to do a little check-in on the Coping Corner as well, in addition to finish off the show with Boone's waiver wire pickups of the week. So with that, it is time to fire up the post-Week 13 People's Panic Meter.
Would you say it's time for everyone to panic? Yes, I would, Kent.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening! No! Wait! Everybody stay calm! Stay calm! What's the procedure? Stay calm!
The Panic Meter is presented by Dentech, protecting your teeth from fantasy stress, one matchup at a time. Before we dive into the submissions for this week, let's table set. Let's go over the current players in the Coping Corner. We'll go section by section here. We've got entire offenses in the Coping Corner. Falcons offense, Vikings offense, Commanders offense. I'm going to pause here, Boone, because I think it's worth just, I don't think we got any pushback to the Vikings offense. We're still getting submissions like, I'm panicked on Justin Jefferson. Brother, we're in the Coping Corner. This is what, this is what the Coping Corner is. You should have been not panicked about Justin Jefferson probably long before we even put him in the Coping Corner. That was DOA a long time ago. So we're not that offense, but Falcons offense, Commanders offense. Just quickly, do you have any sort of interest in taking out either offense from the Coping Corner? We got a big game from Bijan Robinson with the Falcons offense. Drake London potentially coming back here in a few weeks, maybe this week as well. He's now day to day, not week to week. And the Commanders offense, I think with Terry McLaurin back out there, put up a really nice game against one of the best defenses in the league.
Yeah, it took a little while for that Commanders offense to really get going. It was like that explosion late, but yeah, it did look a lot better for sure. I don't think I'm going to overreact to just one game where a lot of the production came late in that one. So I'm willing to leave them in there. We don't know the quarterback situation, right? Jaden Daniels might come back this week, but he hasn't been cleared for contact yet. They're not going to address that, they said, until Friday. So we're not going to know if he's going to play or not. And when he gets back, is there going to be some rust? We don't know. For sure, there's going to be some games. I know they have some good matchups in the fantasy playoffs, but overall, I'm willing to just leave the Commanders in there. That running back situation, we're going to talk about Chris Rodriguez when we get to the waiver wire section, but we're not going to talk about him as somebody that's coming in to help you win your league, just as a guy that you could slot into your lineup as like an RB3, right? And maybe Terry McLaurin will get it going. Like, this was a good game from him. He definitely looked better than I expected getting back out there, but I think I need to see more. I'm willing to leave them in there. I think it's a lost season for them. And then for the Falcons, like, Bijan Robinson's not the reason why we put them in the Coping Corner. Like, he's been pretty much fine all year. It's everything else in that offense. And Drake London, the quote today was that he has a chance to come back this week. Not exactly confidence inspiring that that's going to get him back for this game, just that he has a chance to be out there. So I think it is still potentially going to be a week for him. And yeah, I look at that offense and it's Bijan Robinson. I'm not buying the Kyle Pitts game that he had this week. I think we need to see more because he's had several good matchups leading up to this game, and he did not do much with those. So just because he had one good outing, I'm not just going to turn around on him. So yeah, I think we would leave both these in there. You feel differently?
No, I think that's all perfectly well said. And not to mention, just from a matchup perspective, the Atlanta Falcons obviously had a great Week 13 matchup against the New York Jets, but Seahawks in Week 14, that's going to be tough to trust. They get the Rams in the fantasy championship Week 17. And then for the Washington Commanders, they get the Vikings this week. Then they get the Giants, but they have 2 games the rest of the way with the Philadelphia Eagles, one of which being Week 18. So it doesn't really matter for your fantasy teams. But I think the reality is with both these teams that there are still functional pieces here. Remember, if you're in the coping corner, it's not like, oh my God, we're never playing this guy ever again. It's just that the expectations have dramatically changed. For some of these guys, it is you're hopefully never playing them ever again. Hopefully you're not playing, Xavier Worthy at this point or something like that. We'll get to him in a moment. But for most of these players, just the ceiling case has been dramatically changed. And I think with both of these offenses, the ceiling case has been dramatically changed. Speaking of Xavier Worthy, let's get to the wide receivers here. We got Xavier Worthy, Matthew Golden, Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas Jr., Calvin Ridley. Brian Thomas Jr. is getting blocking highlights tweeted out from the Jaguars Twitter handle as he's opening big catch and run plays for Jacoby Myers. So I don't think there's any reason to take any of these wide receivers out of the coping corner.
Yeah, he was the guy here that you kind of hoped that he'd come back this week and do something, and we might have to have this conversation. And yet I think the way it looks right now in that offense is it's probably Jacoby Myers, it's Brenton Strange, Parker Washington's banged up now, so we'll see if that impacts BTJ at all, but he seems like an afterthought at the moment in that offense. And just kind of like all year long, the vibes haven't been there. It seems like he's just not a great fit either in the scheme or with this coaching staff. I would love to see him get traded this offseason and end up somewhere else and kind of have a fresh start because we saw last year he could be a very productive player. It doesn't really seem like it's going to happen in Jacksonville, at least this season. Maybe it'll be different next year if he sticks around, but yeah, no reason to bring him out of the coping corner.
No, 84% route participation, target on just 11% of those routes. Again, I still think he's going to have some weeks to end the season, but I think it would be weird to not have a coping corner and not have Brian Thomas Jr. with the way that this season has gone for him. Running backs here, we've got Bucky Irving, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Isaiah Pacheco, Alvin Kamara. I think we probably should take Bucky Irving out of the coping corner considering how this debut went for him. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, our main issue with him was just the health, right? And they kind of were being a little strange about it for a couple weeks there, that we weren't really sure when he was going to come back. And you had brought up on the show, like there was some talk about the difficulties that he had just getting back out on the field. But then he shows up out on the field, and the reports we got before the game were that they were going to limit him, that they were probably going to dial back his snaps. And they did to an extent, right? He played, I think, around 53% of the snaps. And yet still super productive, gets a ton of work, 19 touches, 81 yards from scrimmage, scores a touchdown, looks great. I think we're putting him right back in the RB1 conversation for fantasy. So it's not a bad thing that we take some of these guys out of the coping corner. We always discuss that normally it's when a situation changes. And yeah, we finally saw Bucky back out there after he struggled with, at the time, what they didn't act was like a big injury when he first got hurt. They kind of acted like he was only going to be out for a couple weeks. And then it stretches to a big chunk of the season. And now he's back out there. He's back to being Bucky Irving. And we're excited to have him for the most important point in the fantasy season. So he's going to help some people win some fantasy titles, no doubt, as long as they made it to the fantasy playoffs, because it might have been a difficult stretch here not having him.
I made it with one team with Bucky Irving, my only Bucky Irving team. And I'm hoping he comes back and does exactly what you said. Out of the coping corner, back to running back one spot, and I agree with you. The people agree with you as well. We put this in the YouTube chat if you're watching live along with us. We asked who should come out of the final coping corner. Bucky Irving receives 80% of the votes between the 4 options. Commanders offense, Trevor Lawrence, Falcons offense. Bucky Irving runs away with it. He is the clear. That's a mandate from the people in the chat, Boone. Popular vote, Electoral College. They all say Bucky Irving is out of the coping corner, and I agree. Rest of season, got a matchup with the Saints, the Falcons, the Panthers, the Dolphins, and then the Panthers again in Week 18. So pretty good schedule the rest of the way for Bucky Irving. He can definitely reclaim his status as one of the best backs in all of fantasy. You love to see it. Let's finish it up with quarterbacks here. Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence. I mean, Justin Fields is not starting, so he's definitely not coming out of the coping corner. Tyrod Taylor is making your boy Adonai Mitchell look like a hero out there. Only wide receiver over 100 yards on Sunday. Justin Boone loves to see it. But Trevor Lawrence had a good game against the Tennessee Titans. I mean, I'm already laughing, but do you think that's enough to take him out of the coping corner? I don't even know what he's doing in here. Who cares?
Yeah, I don't think it's enough. And yeah, they got BTJ back, but we talked about that he's not coming back and putting up a huge game, right? It's not like he's completely changing the offense when he returns to the lineup here. So yeah, I think they beat up on the Titans. The week before also wasn't a terrible game for Trevor Lawrence. Like, he's thrown multiple touchdowns now in back-to-back games, but you look at what he did before that, and I'm not erasing that from my memory, right? He only threw multiple touchdowns in 2 of his first 10 outings. And just like career-wise, when it comes to fantasy, for the most part, the last couple of seasons, he's been a guy that on average is like scoring, 18 fantasy points or less. It's just not that exciting. The odd time has a spiked week, but it's not that frequent. And yeah, I don't think that that's really going to change that much here. So no, I'm not buying back into T-Law after one game where he beat up on the Titans a little bit.
No, I certainly don't think that really moves the needle for me at all. Again, nobody was really drafting Trevor Lawrence to be a QB1. I kind of find it funny that he's in this discussion. Like, who's coping about Trevor Lawrence besides a few superflex drafters, and longtime bag holders, I suppose. Got a matchup against the Colts in Week 14. Won't have Sauce Gardner. That should be interesting. And then the Jets before getting the Broncos and the Colts again the rest of the fantasy season.
Yeah, and the sad part is that we're going to talk about it when we get to the waiver wire section, and it's just like it was last week for anybody that listened to that episode, because the quarterbacks are brutal this week. And he's just above that 50% rostered mark, but I included him because that's how bad it is. So yes, you could look to him as like a streaming option. If you're a serious contender, though, I really hope that you don't have to rely on any of the quarterbacks we're going to talk about later in the waiver wire. But don't worry, the running backs, the receivers, the tight ends especially, lots of great players at the other positions.
How many people were really happy with their quarterback performance in fantasy football this past weekend? I mean, if you had Patrick Mahomes, obviously that was awesome, but then the rest of the good quarterbacks in this past week, Jordan Love was QB2, Marcus Mariota QB3, Bryce Young QB4, Trevor Lawrence, the aforementioned, was QB5. That's Tyrod Taylor, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott. Those are the only guys that cleared 20 points. And I only say that because my teams are mostly Justin Herbert teams. They're Jalen Hurts teams. They're Josh Allen teams. So maybe it was just me. I have Drake May teams too, and we're taping this before Monday Night Football, obviously. So that is yet to be determined. But maybe it was just me. Matthew Stafford's another one guy I have a couple teams of. I got one with the first guy that we're going to talk about after our break here. But just was a weird down week at quarterback this week.
Yeah, one of the things that I did was when Joe Burrow got dropped in a lot of leagues, I went out and picked him up no matter who my starting quarterback was, and I have the same, right? I got Josh Allen teams, I got Matthew Stafford teams, I got guys that are having great seasons, and yet I went and picked up Joe Burrow, not necessarily because I planned to play him, but because I was worried that one of the other teams was going to grab Joe Burrow, and then when it came to the fantasy playoffs, they were going to have a really good starter. But now I put myself in a position where I might have to make that decision because Burrow, not too bad of a game out there last week. We figure he's going to get T. Higgins back here before the fantasy playoffs. So I might have a tough choice to make when it comes to the fantasy playoffs in weeks 15 to 17. But it's a good problem to have, I suppose, having two good quarterbacks and blocking others from getting Joe Burrow.
The playing defense part of it is definitely a good thing to have. I hate when I have two good quarterbacks in a single quarterback league because I'm like, I'm never going to pick the right one. I'm never going to do it. What possible matchup edge would dictate you play Josh Allen or Joe Burrow? There would be absolutely nothing, in my opinion. So just again, it's like it just gives you a headache. But I love the move to play defense, Boone. That's a savvy strategy by you, pal.
I was going to say, like, it just comes down, it makes you feel like you should just flip a coin, but then all I keep thinking of is Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men. I'm not going to try to do the voice or anything, but yeah, how much have you ever lost in a coin toss, right?
There we go. A movie I've actually seen, by the way. So there you go. There's a
I hope
ref
so.
by Boone. Hey, you don't want to play Has Harmon Seen It? That's going to be a long and sad podcast.
It's one of my favorites.
Let's go with that. Oh, it's a disaster. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, it's time to get into your submissions to the People's Panic Meter for the final time this season. We'll get into that right after this. All right, it's time to get into this week's edition, the final edition of your submissions to the People's Panic Meter. We have 4 tiers in the Panic Meter. We've got no panic, some panic, total panic, and coping corner. And Boone is ready to throw some people into the coping corner. So we'll see how much pushback I can give along the way. Some I'm not going to, including this first submission here, which comes in from TT. And I guess this was just the producer's favorite submission on one Lamar Jackson, because I certainly felt like we got 50 of them. And I knew it as I was sitting on my couch watching the rest of that Thanksgiving game, the night game against the Bengals at home. I'm like, oh boy, we are going to get overloaded with Lamar Jackson emails, because as TT writes in, hi guys, he starts off so nice. Hi guys, after listening to last week's show, I cannot comprehend how Lamar was listed as no panic on the meter. The previous 2 games he had were awful to that point, and this past one was absolutely abysmal to watch. He has one touchdown pass in his last 4 games, and not giving you the rushing stats either. None of their games are gimmies down the stretch, especially since 3 of them are against divisional opponents. With the fantasy playoffs around the corner, how can anyone start him with confidence? Much love, TT. Well, much love back to you, pal. And I agree. I felt very ashamed about our lack of panic on Lamar Jackson. And it pretty much all came down to, Boone, well, he's playing the Bengals defense. Well, the Bengals defense came to play. Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense did not come to play. We'll get into some context around the performance and all of that, but just off the rip here, where are you at with Lamar Jackson on the panic meter?
Yeah, he's all the way in coping corner. Like, there's not even a question, I think, at this point. And it's brutal. And yeah, we did put a lot of faith in those Bengals matchups, not just this week, but the first week of the fantasy playoffs. They get them again. But it is crazy, man. Like, you and I, we both got hit. You kind of mentioned it there, right? We were getting hit on social media a ton after that game. And it was well-deserved. Like, I sat here last week. It was like, no, it's Lamar Jackson, guys. He's going to be fine. Got it wrong. These matchups are coming up. We got it wrong. We totally got it wrong. And I think there's a lot of things that go into it, but it seems like it comes down to the fact that he's not 100%. Like, he's not Lamar Jackson. So when he's not doing that Superman routine for this offense, it just changes the dynamic entirely. And Derrick Henry isn't necessarily the same Derrick Henry either. I think he's on the decline. So when you have Lamar Jackson not threatening defenses like he normally does, now Derrick Henry, who's declining a little bit, he's not going to have as much success. So that's a huge problem for this offense, right? And I just think in general, like, they don't have like that true number 1 receiver that they can go to, that can kind of bail them out, that he can toss it up to. They've gone with like a mix of guys. I like Zay Flowers. We've talked about him a bunch. Doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. Is a really fun player, but he doesn't profile as that like true number 1. Mark Andrews, who kind of was like the default number 1 pass catcher in this offense, he's older. I mean, we saw Isaiah Likely have a good game here against the Bengals because they're absolutely terrible against tight ends. But I mean, just a fact here. What's that?
I said, except one thing, where he fumbled at the goal line. Otherwise, really good game.
Other than that, yeah, the final stat line was a decent fantasy stat line. That is what I'm focused on here.
Yeah.
But yeah, did make a foolish play there at the goal line. Should have held onto the ball. But you look at this, like Lamar Jackson, the fact that he now has gone 3 games where he's been under 10 fantasy points, where he hasn't scored a touchdown, like, is the simulation breaking here? Is the matrix falling apart? Like, what is going on, Harmon? Like, of all the things, I never would have predicted this. This would have been like the last thing that I thought was going to happen, even knowing that he might not be 100%. So it's really unfortunate. I mean, I'm invested in this offense for fantasy too. Like you just said, you have Lamar on teams. There's really not much you can do about it other than I think you got to sit him. Like, I think you have to sit him. Hopefully you can find a better option, but I know, like, what are you going to do? Like, you're going to just continue to ride this after he's had 3 like pretty decent matchups. And what's the hope that he's just going to get healthier? And we're seeing that with some players. We're going to talk about Chuba Hubbard a little later. And he's a guy that rushed back from his injury and wasn't himself. And now we're starting to see Chuba look a little bit better. Maybe that could happen for Lamar. I know it seems insane that you would put Lamar on your bench, but I mean, if you're in a regular redraft league and there's the normal quarterbacks who are available on the waiver wire, we're not talking about like super, super deep leagues where people are hoarding quarterbacks, which they might be for the fantasy playoffs. But I hope you got somebody else you can play. Let's put it that way, because I would not want to have to trust Lamar. And on all the teams where I have him, I'm trying to find other options this week.
Yeah, I mentioned the stat to Chris yesterday on the recap show. Lamar Jackson has had 5 games of single-digit fantasy point totals since 2023. 3 of them are the last 3 weeks. He's had his worst, second worst, and 9th worst game by EPA per dropback in that same stretch in the last 3 weeks. I mean, this is just not the Lamar Jackson that we even saw at the beginning of the season. And I think the reason that I'm really concerned here is that, I think Lamar Jackson probably not 100% healthy, although I thought he moved a little bit better in this past game, but certainly still I don't think 100%. That just happens sometimes. Like, you pick up an injury, you try to come back, you're a team player, you want to be out there with your guys, you think you give the team the best chance to win, and then it just doesn't work out for a variety of reasons. And I think this was the only game of the 3 that they lost. Obviously, they're playing the Jets and the Browns. Those teams stink. The Bengals are better than that, but regardless, you're not adding the rushing element from a fantasy standpoint. And then from a passing standpoint, I do think that there have been issues with this Ravens passing game all season long, to the point that I would honestly kind of put the whole Ravens pass game in the coping corner, if we're being serious here for a second, like with Lamar Jackson as well, because Mark Andrews is the guy people drafted to be a tight end 1. He hasn't been that. Zay Flowers had a great start to the season, but he just hasn't really been and he's not been bad, but he just hasn't really been a needle mover either. He's wide receiver 38 in points per game right now, which is crazy considering that first game that he had, it looked like it was going to be an electric season for him. Yeah. He's really dipped back, even in the Lamar games. Again, it's just been kind of mid-production from him. And I think that it just kind of all goes back to me. I think Lamar just doesn't trust what he sees right now for whatever reason, whether it's the pass protection has taken a step back, he's not 100% healthy, but even at the beginning of the year, I thought he was just a little bit kind of herky-jerky in the pocket. And sometimes, like, great players have bad seasons, and I just kind of think, like, Lamar is just not having one of his good seasons right now. And, maybe I think we definitely were a little bit too slow to adjust to that one.
And now, like, with it being this 3-game sample size, like, part of the reason why I didn't want to overreact to 1 game or even 2 games is, like, we know how it goes, right? He could have had a game or 2 that were bad and turn it right back around. But to have now 3 and to kind of continue the same problems over and over here, I think we could put a lot of credence behind this, that this is not just like some outlier. This is actually just him not performing like we're not used to seeing. And I think it's a huge reason is because he's not healthy, but there's other aspects of this offense this year, like you pointed out, that are definitely a little bit problematic and haven't made it as smooth as it's been in past years. And, part of that, Derrick Henry maybe being on the decline, they should start to get Keaton Mitchell a little more involved. I would love to see that.
Like, fine. I honestly kind of wish they just stuck with Derrick Henry a little bit more in last week's game. I mean, I thought he was running well, and they just kind of got away from it and were really trying to throw the ball in the way. And they had some success throwing the ball too. I mean, I do think it is worth mentioning Isaiah Likely doesn't fumble at the goal line. Zay Flowers doesn't get called for a pretty close OPI, touchdown in the end zone. And then also Devontae Walker, like 2 passes hit him in the hands that he does not bring in. Like, we could be having an entirely different, we're not having this conversation about Lamar Jackson if those 3 plays went the other way. But even again, without those, I still thought their passing game overall it didn't quite feel right in this game.
Yeah, and maybe you see something different with Derrick Henry. He's fine. I mean, you said he's fine. Yeah, he's fine. He's still a good running back. But this isn't the Derrick Henry that they could just put everything on his back and let him take over if Lamar's not himself, right? I think at this point in his career, these 2 guys both have to be kind of firing for this offense to be as dangerous as we've seen it be in the past. And we're just not there right now. And it's going to make people like, I'm going to have to go over it when we do the rankings, they'll come out on Tuesday. I'm going to have to go over it here, but I do think people should be looking long and hard to see if they can find other options to not have to play Lamar this week.
Well, you can go ahead and just put this in pencil right now, pal. One of Boone's 6-pack of questions better be like, where do I rank Lamar Jackson? And we better have a discussion about this, especially because, one of my best teams is a Lamar Jackson team, a Superflex team. And like, do I need to play Tyrod Taylor over Lamar Jackson in the coping corner?
I don't know if we're going that far, but
I don't know if we're going that far, but again, we will have to talk about it. All right, so Lamar Jackson to the coping corner. What could again? I recognize it's been really bad, but what could possibly go wrong when you put one of the MVP quarterbacks in the coping corner? It could definitely come back to bite us. But let's get to the next one here. This one comes in from Dave. He's got a 14-team super flex, 2 flexes. I have Lamar Jackson, Emeka Egbuka, Rome Odunze, and Oronde Gadsden. All likely belong in the coping corner. They have been destroying, all caps destroying, so he means it, destroying my team in the last month or so. I just traded Quinshon Judkins, Caleb T. Higgins, Chris Godwin, and Addison for Gibbs. Okay, anyways, we'll whatever. Point is, did not happen here for these players. We're going to focus on Emeka Egbuka and Rome Odunze here. We're going to actually get to Oronde Gadsden in just a second. We obviously just addressed Lamar Jackson. So Emeka Egbuka, Rome Odunze, let's group these two guys together, Boone. Where are each of them going to be for you? Let's start with Emeka Egbuka.
Emeka Egbuka, I'll just tell you right now, both these guys are going to the coping corner for me. And I think you're going to push back on this one. I think that's why you've grouped them together here. And that's okay. I'm willing to listen to that because we both really like these guys. And I think we both have a ton of them on our fantasy teams because we talked a lot about them before the season. We were drafting them pretty frequently, I think. But let's start. I mean, for Egbuka, like we've talked about this. I brought up that stat a few weeks ago and that stat just keeps growing where he only has one game where he's had double-digit fantasy points in the last 7 now, right? We started talking about that when it was like 4 or 5. Now we're up to 6 of 7. It's been bad. And it's been particularly bad when you look at what he did early in the season when we thought we were geniuses. And I still think this guy is going to be a great player. I think he is a really good pro. But what we saw early in the season when through the first 5 weeks, he was the 3rd highest scoring fantasy receiver on a per game basis. Like he was outstanding. It looked like we were potentially going to have an immediate superstar. And now since then, since week 6, wide receiver 45 per game. Like it is just such a stark difference. And again, this is another situation where I do think the injury kind of happened in there and that really seemed to change his season. I don't know if that's the only reason, but I think that definitely factored in. We also saw this offense just deal with a ton of injuries, not just at the skill positions, Chris Godwin missing time, Mike Evans missing time. The line has just been kind of this rotation of guys that have been getting hurt and coming back all year long. So that's a problem. But I look at this and he's another one where it's like hard to have real faith in putting him in your lineup in these weeks that matter the most, right? In these weeks that are so important. He's killing fantasy lineups right now. Outside of that one good game that he had like over the last 2 months here. He gets the Saints this week. He went 3 for 35 against them when they played in week 8. So it's another thing to be worried about. Chris Godwin, I thought, looked a little more like himself. If we're talking about guys that are potentially getting healthier, who dealt with injuries, I thought he looked better in this game too. So what does that do for potentially taking away some targets from Emeka Egbuka? Mike Evans might practice this week. He's probably going to come back soon. Does that make this whole offense better and we see some better performances from Egbuka? Or is this a situation where we see some guys come back that might have fresher legs because they've been sitting out and they could be better down the stretch and Egbuka could take a bit of a back seat? I just don't know what exactly is going to change for him that all of a sudden he's going to go back to scoring at a clip that we feel better about. Do you want to talk about him specifically or do you want me to go on to Odunze?
No, rip on Rome real quick and then we'll put, because I do think we'll group them together in terms of the response here.
Yeah, I'm worried because I feel like you've been working on this one all day. You got something big prepared for me here. But Odunze, another guy,
I swear.
I do really like Odunze. And I said I will listen to an argument on this one because he has been producing, right? It's not like he's been having these absolute terrible games. He has been producing, right? 4 of his last 5 games before this week, they weren't bad performances. And then you look at this week against the Eagles, you knew that was going to be a bit tougher, right? So that I can give him a bit of a pass. And yet we know the production has been pretty boomer bust with him, right? He's had kind of decent production, but he hasn't been having as many of those big games as he did earlier in the season. And then you look ahead to the schedule here, Packers, Browns, Packers, the next 3 weeks. I think that's problematic. I think they have a lot of guys on this offense that are willing to spread the ball around too. It's coping corner in my mind for this guy as well. Even though these are 2 players that we were extremely high on before the season, I think we have to change the outlook here because I don't see this like rocky road that these 2 receivers have been on recently. I don't see it smoothing out. I don't know what exactly is going to change for them where all of a sudden we're going to start getting these top 15, even top 20 performances from them more consistently like we were earlier in the year.
I wanted to put these guys together because I think they are very similar in the way that not just like they are guys we liked in the offseason, and they were guys that got off to these fantastic starts this year where they looked like the right picks. In the first 5 to 6 weeks of the season, these were the best, like two of the best producing wide receivers in fantasy, which one, I think, probably altered expectations of what these guys were going to be the rest of the season. You know, I thank God don't do rest of season rankings anymore. I know you do rest of season rankings, and this is why I hated doing them. It's because like you can overreact and it's like, okay, well, this guy is a right answer. He's a wide receiver 1 rest of season. The reality is that these guys, at least for me in my rankings, were around like wide receiver 30. And I kind of think that they're going to end up finishing maybe a little bit better, but probably right around there to sort of what we expected them to be this season, which is volatile wide receiver 2-3 types. And to me, I don't think it's instructive about the, like, hey, this happened at the beginning of the season. Those games still counted. Those games still mattered, right? And just because it hasn't happened lately doesn't mean it will never happen again. And to me, Boone, the thing that one of the reasons I can't put either of these guys in the coping corner, and look, like you made a really good argument there. We'll come to a consensus on this, but the thing that gives me the biggest pause is this feels so much like when we put Tetero McMillan in the coping corner and immediately, literally regretted it the week after, where Tetero McMillan in the first whatever games it was, first 10 weeks of the season, was averaging 7.4 points per game. He had 7 of his last 8 games were single-digit fantasy performances. Again, some of the same stuff we could talk about with the Dunze and Emeka Egbuka. And then he comes out and he has his best game of the season against the Falcons, has kind of a 9.5 game the week after in week 12, and then around 10.3 points this past week. And to me, just like anytime there's a young wide receiver who has kind of shaky quarterback play, which is definitely true in Chicago. And I think Baker's been shaky so far this year and also is contributing to the problem a little bit with some like mistakes and drops, which is definitely true of Adunze and definitely true of Egbuka. And it was true of McMillan as well at times this year. Like those are things that just even out over the course of a season for a really good young ascending wide receiver. And I totally hear you that I'm saying this, and I have no idea if this is about to happen next week. I don't know if it's going to happen for Dunze in some of these tough matchups or anything like that, but I will be stunned if we don't get like 2 or 3 more good games from both of these wide receivers the rest of the way, because to me, like in good conscience, if it's especially after making the mistake with McMillan, and maybe I'm overcorrecting for that. If it's a good young wide receiver who is the clear lead target getter in his offense, which is true for both of these guys, even as other players have emerged in Chicago, it's still been Rome Odunze as the lead target player over the course of the season. And obviously Colson Loveland is a baller. Obviously, Luther Burden is very good as well, but still like targets per route, very similar. To me, I just think that we're not going to see these guys stay down the rest of the season, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I truly am coping here and I should be in the coping corner with these two players. But to me, it feels very similar to the Tetero McMillan situation, which we regretted right away.
I think in my mind, at least, the difference with the Tetero McMillan situation was something did change there, right? Like they straight up said they decided to use him differently. They started moving him around more. That was kind of the big thing that I feel like unlocked that game that we got from him where we took him out and now potentially is helping this passing attack in Carolina be better the rest of the season. And I think that's a credit to the coaching, right? Like Dave Canales does a good job there. I don't know. For me, like this comes down to like, I don't dislike these two. In fact, I really, really like these two players, and I think they're going to have great careers. And I just look at it like from a real life standpoint, talent wise, I absolutely think these guys are great. I'm looking at it from a fantasy perspective and going, okay, we now have 7 weeks of Egbuka disappointing 6 out of those 7 and just not being the same player. And now we keep kind of pushing him down to where's he going to be this week? Like it's hard to move him outside of like the top 24, but he ends up kind of going down into that range. He becomes this more risky play. And each week you kind of hope like the Lamar Jackson thing that, okay, this is going to be the week when he gets it right. He gets it going. And that hasn't happened now. And we're going on, week 8 potentially of that. So him, I'm very worried about this season. Not career-wise. Not worried career-wise about either of these guys.
Yeah.
Odunze's the one that, like I said, I think I would listen to a total panic and not coping corner a little bit more for him, just because he's kind of continued to produce through this. Hasn't had as many good games, but has continued to have better stats than Igbuka over this last stretch. So for him, I do feel, and I don't know, I want to say that I have a little more faith in the Bears offense as well, even though I think that schedule is going to be pretty tough. But have faith in Ben Johnson, and they have the rushing attack going there. But I don't know, man. Overall, I think these two guys, what it comes down to for me is putting them in your lineup does not feel good. And making that decision every week the rest of the way, especially when we get to the fantasy playoffs, is going to be very, very difficult. And I'm not looking forward to having that, that time to figure that out in my rankings and where we're going to put them. And people are going to be depending on that. So that is a real concern the rest of the season for two players that at the beginning of the year were just automatic, set it and forget it. These guys are going to win our leagues. And yes, they're not performing at that level. They might be a little closer to where we drafted them. Overall in the season, they're definitely values. No regrets on taking them, but I don't see the thing that's going to change like it changed with McMillan, where all of a sudden things are going to turn in a positive direction and we're going to see more consistent production from them.
We didn't see it coming with McMillan either, though. That's the thing. Like, things change quickly, and it just happens. So,
where we landing here?
I don't know. I can't do it. I can't do it.
All right.
I'm going to hold out the faith here on these two guys.
We have to agree, so we hold them out. Yeah. So, let's do it.
There'll be interesting discussions when we do. So total panic for sure. I mean, obviously, I'm not looking forward to having to, and like the two teams that I've got Odunze on that are really good. I'm going to start him, and I'm not going to like it. I'm not going to like it. I'm not going to feel good about it, but I do think I'm going to continue to do it. I actually do think that after talking to you, I'm a little more worried about Igbuka just for the rest of the season. I think both these guys are players that I'm going to really be targeting next draft season for sure. Yeah. Dynasty leagues for sure. No panic on those guys in that sense, but just with like some of the players coming back. But man, at the same time, like the players coming back for the Bucs, I think can actually benefit Igbuka at some point, just because it'll take some defensive attention away. I mean, that will definitely help for both of these guys. But yeah, right now, I think we're just sort of course correcting to great start to the season, to rough middle of the season. And I'm going to be willing to hold out hope here that we get a good end of season for both of these guys. I mean, shoot, again, with Rome Odunze, with all the wind and like they're running the ball, Caleb Williams completing sub 50% of his passes in that game, I think we could be having, I mean, again, if he catches, if he gets that touchdown pass, we're probably not having this conversation about him. It's just the margin for error for this stuff is so narrow. Ultimately, I feel like the coping corner at wide receiver is made for players like Calvin Ridley and like Brian Thomas Jr. that have basically given you nothing all year. Matthew Golden, Xavier Worthy. I don't know. These guys, to me, too good to belong in the coping corner, and that's just what I feel about it.
It does feel harsh. I will say, though, listening to Matt Harmon when it comes to receivers, that is going to put you in a good position normally for fantasy. So I will listen to you here. We will keep them out of the coping corner, and we will hope that we see that turnaround like we saw with McMillan.
Oh, great. Now even more pressure on it.
Now it's all on you.
Let's keep it moving here. Yeah, it's all on me. You just Aaron Rodgers me just said, well, Harmon doesn't show up to the film room and doesn't sight adjust on the routes. But all right, let's get to the next one here from Dominic. And this one is just entitled multi-entry. Just naming guys on my squad so you can put them all in the coping corner at once. Parker Washington is hurt with 3 other viable targets there now, and T-Law throwing him the ball. Rome Odunze has awful upcoming matchups. His connection with Caleb seems a lot more like a next season thing. Oronde Gadsden, I'm curious to see if you won't put him in the coping corner, but it looks really bad now with Hampton seemingly coming back and Herbert getting hurt. Also, Michael Pittman looks bad. We talked about Rome Odunze, obviously. We talked about some of these players. Let's hit on Oronde Gadsden and Michael Pittman here, starting with Oronde Gadsden. Boone, where are you at with Oronde Gadsden?
So I brought Gadsden up last week, if you recall, on the preview show, right? And I was talking about him. We talked about a few players who were kind of going in. I don't know if we would call it like a make or break week, but it was, I think, referred to it as like a pivot week, where it was like things could go in a bunch of different directions depending on what kind of game that they had. And Gadsden, I said, was the one that I was most worried about. And I thought because he had that great month, he had like an almost elite month from a fantasy perspective, to see that from a rookie tight end, you thought we really had a breakout player. Then he got hurt. We had 2 down games. He went on bye, and I was really hopeful that he was going to come out of bye, be healthy, and could turn it around. But of all the players we talked about last week, he was the one that did worry me the most on that list. And we saw him come out and not have a great game, right? 1 catch, 27 yards. Now Justin Herbert's banged up. Doesn't seem like he's going to be out long, but could that impact things as well here? I think I'm ready to put Gadsden in the coping corner too. Again, another player that I think is going to have a great career. Will probably have a game here or there, fantasy-wise, the rest of the way where you'll feel good about having him in your lineup. But I think more often than not, he is going to disappoint the rest of this season, and I'm very, very concerned about him now. And he's another one where he went from almost being in the elite conversation to now I think he's falling into that big group of guys that are like low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2 types, and you kind of just shuffle up and deal every week and hope you hit on the right one.
Yeah, we showed the stat just a minute ago from Datarama, and which I think really helps sort of explain what's going on here. Rondé Gadsden earlier in the season was running around on like 83% of the dropbacks. It's dipped down to like 61% the last 3 games, weeks 10 to 13. Yeah, 61%. That's just been really problematic. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that the offensive line and Joe Alt is not a part of the picture anymore. And I think that Rondé Gadsden having to stick in to block a little bit more, just not being out there in some of the formations where, hey, they need more of a blocking tight end out there as well. He's not getting that same level of playing time. So yeah, I think he's gone from a guy that was a set it and forget it type of tight end to not really that player anymore. So yeah, I'm actually with you here. I'm okay with coping corner for Gadsden, which feels super harsh because he was basically found money anyways. But just doesn't really have that outlook the rest of the season. Let's talk Michael Pittman here. Another guy.
The way you've always described coping corner to me, though. No, the way you've always described coping corner to me, though, isn't that we're like totally slamming the door on this player. It's just there's no reason to really talk about him right now because we've seen a long enough stretch here where he's not producing. The other thing I didn't mention too was not just the injury, but Quentin Johnston came back around that time as well, and were we seeing Gadsden potentially get some of those QJ kind of looks in the offense. And then when QJ came back, maybe wasn't getting those anymore. Right. So I think that factors in as well here, but yeah, great fantasy asset, great long-term dynasty potential. It's going to be awesome. You're going to want him, but the rest of the season, that's what I'm looking at here. And I am worried about his production the rest of the way. And that's unfortunately why we're putting him in coping corner, but yeah, much love here, Gadsden. We're going to have a great career. Don't worry, buddy.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, and look, the situation for him, unlike with Odunze and Egbuka, like the situation hasn't really fundamentally changed for either of those guys. They're just running cold. Whereas with Gadsden, things have changed here, and he's not out there playing as much, whereas the playing time for the other guys hasn't really changed. Michael Pittman, the next player up here that we're talking about, what is your level of panic on Michael Pittman?
I feel like we're just like playing a recording here, but I'm going coping corner again on this one, Harmon. Like,
dude,
he hasn't topped 30 yards. He hasn't topped 30 yards in 3 straight games. He's been held under 45 yards in 7 of his 12 games this year. So 60% of the time, he puts up 45 yards or less. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? I know he scores touchdowns and saves his fantasy day once in a while with those, but it makes it very tough to put him in your lineup as anything more than like a touchdown or bust wide receiver 3. And if that's what you just expect from him, then okay, then we're not going to put him in coping corner. But I'm looking at a guy that I don't think is really producing at the level that people think that he's producing. He's got the name. He was in an offense that was absolutely producing like gangbusters all season long. And then the last few weeks, it started to trail off a little bit, right? And we talked about some of the matchups that could be a problem. I mentioned the Jonathan Taylor situation. I was a little bit worried that maybe he wasn't going to have the same kind of production in the second half of the season. Now we have Daniel Jones out there playing on one leg. That doesn't seem good. It's just this whole scenario now for the Colts, in my mind, isn't what it was earlier in the season. And even back then, Pittman was still kind of boom or bust, but he had more booms. Mm-hmm. Now it's not really happening for him, so I'm worried.
I actually think that you made some really good points here. And our next email is actually on a Colts player as well. And I just kind of feel like this whole Colts offense is just trending in the wrong direction. You know, you brought up this with Jonathan Taylor a couple weeks ago, and shout out to you. You looked really good since you've said that, by the way, because things have not looked so great with Jonathan Taylor since you said, like, is he going to have a disappointing end to his season? You know, he has 20 carries for like 80 yards or whatever, but maybe not that week winning face melting type play from Jonathan Taylor there. And, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, those guys are very matchup dependent. And Alec Pierce got a single high look in this last game against the Houston Texans. And guess what he did? Scored a long touchdown on it. Like, he's going to do that. But the week before, he had one catch against the Kansas City Chiefs, and it was more of like Michael Pittman and Josh Downs got the targets. But at this point now, with all of these targets, with how matchup dependent it is and how scheme dependent Daniel Jones is, and now Daniel Jones is banged up, I kind of think that all of these Colts are definitely trending in the wrong direction here. So I do think Pittman, who again was a little bit found money, he was a late round draft pick, like he probably was always going to be like a wide receiver 3, but I agree that maybe the early season expectations sort of got people out over their skis with Michael Pittman. So seems harsh, but I don't have the same impassioned plea to keep him out of the coping corner as I did with the other 2 wide receivers I was talking about earlier. Let's get to the next email here. David sends this in on Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren has gone from a set it and forget it to a mid producer at the tight end position. Is this due to Daniel Jones' injury, or is he hitting a late season wall? Boone, what's your level of panic on Tyler Warren?
This seems funny based on the way that I've talked all day, but I have no panic on Tyler Warren. And this is one of those submissions that I don't even really understand it. Like, you might have to tell me if I'm missing something here, but like, from what I see, he's had 2 down games all year. He had 5 for 26 against the Steelers, but he did get 7 targets in that game. And then week 3, 3 for 38 against the Titans. Like, that's like an average tight end fantasy day. But okay, if the expectations were super high for him, then yes, then that's a down day for sure. But his last 3 games here, 8 catches for 99 yards, 5 catches for 45 yards, which depending on your scoring, you're getting, that's like 7 to 10 fantasy points. Like, I don't know what you're expecting from your tight end. Do you think he's Trey McBride? Like, I don't know what you think you're getting from Warren here, but this week, the yardage total was down, but like, he caught a touchdown, saved his fantasy day. Like, what more do you want from this guy? Like, if you need a pick me up, if you need me to tell you something that's going to make you feel better, he gets Jacksonville, Seattle, San Francisco, and Jacksonville again over the next month. The Jags and the Seahawks, even though the Seahawks are a really good defense, both those defenses are top 5 in terms of fantasy points allowed to tight ends. The Niners were the other one in there. They're 13th most. So all plus matchups coming up for Warren. And I would make the argument that I don't even think he's been bad. I don't even know why we're talking about him.
Yeah, I'm with you. No panic on Tyler Warren. I wish I had Tyler Warren problems at some of my tight end positions across my fantasy football teams. I will say that. By the way,
all of our Tucker Craft teams.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, I wish. Don't even say that name to me. I would just note on last note on Michael Pittman, I've mentioned like the 2 high splits and those kind of favor him. I will just say 2 more games the rest of the season against the Jaguars, who are 10th in terms of 2 high rate. The Seattle Seahawks, obviously not a good matchup for any passing game, and maybe Daniel Jones just gets smoked in that game on his fractured freaking leg, but they're 7th in terms of 2 high rate. So maybe some good games down the stretch for Michael Pittman. But
if I'm wrong about this one, maybe I'll have to buy you dinner next time I see you.
Oh, wow. All right. Sick. Now I really got something riding on this whole thing. Okay. Last one here before we get to break. Jeff sends in this email. Matt and Justin, it's time, right? We need to put Pearsall in the coping corner. Weeks 11 through 13, he has 5. I like how Jeff thinks he needs to remind us of this.
I know.
I'm aware that Ricky Pearsall has 5 catches on 9 total targets for 20 yards. I'm painfully aware. I'm scared that I'm so aware. With his bye this week, would anyone dare play him in week 15 over the likes of a Jets wide receiver? It may be time to reset and see how the offseason goes for Ricky Pearsall. Yeah, obviously you're not considering playing Pearsall because the Niners are painfully on bye in week 14. Then you do get the Titans after that, Colts, and Bears the rest of the fantasy season. But yeah, Boone, I'll go ahead and actually say this one first. I do think it's coping corner for Ricky Pearsall. I'm not going to fly too close to the sun here. As much as I like Ricky Pearsall and think like, look, the first 3 games of the season, they happened. We know he can play. I just don't think he's going to get the volume that he needs to hit consistently in his very downfield role when you've got CMC getting the scam targets underneath. They're good targets, but the scam targets underneath. You've got George Kittle getting some of the designery stuff, and Jawan Jennings is still there as well. So to me, I think Pearsall is a guy that is a coping corner candidate. Might not be fully healthy. Maybe he's healthy out of the bye. I'd love it if he dunks on the Tennessee Titans this week. That would be great. Or next week coming out of the bye. But for me, yeah. Jason Jung, one of our designer here, just sent us a tweet that 49ers wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, when asked about CMC's workload, he said, expletive, I would love 30 touches a game. I'd love Ricky Pearsall to get 30 touches a game, but yeah, has he even had 30 targets on the season? I don't know.
Yeah, you summed it up well. I also think Jeff kind of hit the nail on the head too, right? The idea here that we could look at some of this and say, okay, he's coming back from the injury and the production is about as bad as it gets, but he's coming back from injury and the weather and the matchups and all this sort of stuff. But it comes down to they're going on bye. They come back and have an easy schedule, but who is going to have the belief to put him in their lineup for week 15? There's just no way you can do it. There's absolutely no way you can do it. And let's hope that he comes back strong, that he's a little healthier after the bye, and he finishes with some good stats down the stretch and helps some people win fantasy matchups. But he will not be in my lineup, and I am more than fine with dropping him in redraft this week on the bye. Pick up somebody else, stash a defense, whatever, because I don't think I'm going to play Ricky Pearsall. I definitely have better options on my fantasy teams than what he's offered lately. And yeah, I don't really see the argument for the other side. Like you hope that week 15 we see something different and you reassess then. But right now, this is a guy that I don't even know if he should be on redraft lineups right now, like even on benches, because he just isn't producing. And it seems like the injury derailed this season. And man, it's a bad one. This is another one that we definitely got wrong because I had some excitement and it's looking like you were quite smart for that sabotage drop that you did. And now I have him in the office league. And I played him at least one of those weeks. I think he sat on my bench this week, but yeah, it got me the 1 week.
Again, it's just like we'll see how the rest of the season goes. And then, as Jeff said, it's probably time to reset and see how it looks in the offseason where Juwan Jennings probably moves on and maybe there's more opportunity in this passing game. Because, yeah, I mean, again, it comes back to the coping corner, the situation. It just is accepting it is what it is here. This injury did derail what was really looking like a promising season in the first 3 weeks, and he was looking great. I think he's looked solid since returning, but maybe not as good as he did to start the year. And now he's just fourth in the target pecking order behind 3 good players. I mean, there's no reason to take volume away from McCaffrey, from Kittle, from even Juwan Jennings right now, who apparently everybody is furious at on the opposing sidelines, but he is at least getting touchdowns. And even he's just, it's been like touchdown or bust for him from a fantasy standpoint too. It's the McCaffrey show in San Francisco, and that's about it.
Well, and it's funny here that Jeff mentioned, over the New York wide receivers, because I told you earlier today or yesterday that last week when we did the little film review and I got to pick 3 receivers for you to go look at, Ricky Pearsall was one of the guys we talked about in hopes that there could be a turnaround and he could get it going. But the other guy I thought about replacing him with was Adonai Mitchell. I was like a Jets receiver, and we only have 3 to pick from, and Harmon knows I love Adonai Mitchell. I'm not going to put him in there. They're going to make fun of me for putting him in there, that I love him too much. And 1 week later, man, I really wish we had done AD Mitchell in that, because, yeah, he went out and had a great game, and he's showing the promise that you would have thought we would have seen from Pearsall. And, yeah, I would much rather have AD Mitchell the rest of the season than Pearsall.
God, what a statement. But yeah, you really screwed that one up. I mean, you sent me charting Ricky Pearsall, like Wando Robinson. But the Adonai Mitchell thing, I could have faked that. I could have even just not done the work and come in here and be like, guess what, Boone? He's separating really well on, it's just a small handful of routes. It's 4 routes, but he's separating really well on those 4 routes. If he just wins at the catch point, we're looking at a pretty good X wide receiver in the NFL. I could have faked that. I wouldn't even had to have looked at the film. I also had previously charted a game of Adonai Mitchell anyway. So again, I already knew what that would look like. You could have saved us both time, man.
Well, the good news is we're going to talk about him when we get to the receivers in the waiver wire section. So more AD Mitchell talk coming up.
All right, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we've got a few more submissions to run through to the People's Panic Meter. We will get into that right after this. All right, we're back. We've got a few more submissions to go through to the People's Panic Meter before we address the final state of the coping corner. Starting with this email from Logan. Logan asks us, when do we start panicking about Jahmyr Gibbs? He's consistently underperforming every other week, and with the news of Frank Ragnow not returning, there's nothing there that's going to make it better. Is it time to panic? Boone, is it time to panic about Jahmyr Gibbs, who does have a little bit of a, hey, he's on this week, he's off this week, but I mean, when he's on, he's pretty on. So where are we at from a panic standpoint with Jahmyr Gibbs?
Does he have a little bit of that? I'm not sure that he does. I know that's what the question said here, but like, I don't know if he does. This is another one, Harmon, that I don't totally get. And maybe it's just like people's expectations are way too high, but do they think he's going to score 3 touchdowns every single game? Like, this is another one of those ones like we did with Tyler Warren, where it's like, we know this player is good. We know he's producing for you. Yes, he has some absolute spike weeks, but like, we're 1 week removed from this guy scoring like 50 fantasy points. Week 12, he had like 50 fantasy points. And now 2 weeks later, we're talking about this guy potentially being a panic meter guy. Like, I don't get it at all. Like, in the most recent game. All right, let's just go through it. Let me point it out. 86 scrimmage yards and 3 catches this week, which is not terrible. Like, it's not, he didn't find the end zone. He didn't give you 20 points. Okay. But 86 scrimmage yards and 3 catches is a pretty decent fantasy day. Like, that's a down week for Gibbs, but that's still a pretty good fantasy day for most running backs. You look after that. So 264 yards, 11 catches, 3 touchdowns the week before. That's the 50.1. The week before that, 146 scrimmage yards and 5 catches. Is that a down week? I don't think that's a down week. He just didn't score a touchdown.
What I meant by every other week,
catches
Boone,
and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, what I meant by every other week, Boone, is that since week 7, his point totals go 35.3, 4.3, 36.7, 17.1, 49.9, 10.1. So every other week, he literally wins you your week. And then the other one, like, yeah, he had 1 true dud.
Yeah, there's that 1 dud in there. I think it was against the Vikings, right? He had 1 actual bad game in that stretch. Other than that, I think he's fine. And I know it's really unfortunate that we got teased with the Frank Ragnow thing and he's not able to come back. That would have been really great. And it's too bad that Amon-Ra St. Brown is hurt right now. We'll see if that's going to keep him out for any games dealing with that ankle injury. Hopefully he's going to be fine. But even if he's out, Gibbs is the kind of talent where that might just mean more volume for him. They might have to lean on him even more, and that might increase the odds of him having a big game here. So yeah, I think he is like the furthest thing from coping corner. This guy, I think there's a better argument that he's the number 1 fantasy running back the rest of the way than he's anywhere near coping corner.
Yeah, negative, not even just no panic, negative panic for me on Jahmyr Gibbs. I would love to have Jahmyr Gibbs on my fantasy teams. That he had that 1 true dud, the 4.3 points against the Vikings, and Dan Campbell literally promoted himself to play caller afterwards because John Morton, that was enough of that already. And I think Jahmyr Gibbs, if St. Brown's not available on Thursday against the Cowboys, he could catch 10 passes in that game. Like, I'm not even kidding. And David Montgomery is a distant memory in this offense at this point. Next one comes in from Adam Petrie, sends in this tweet. Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard I have both, and they're both back to no idea which one to start territory here. So, yeah, definitely frustrating here with these Panthers backs because it's back to a committee, and Boone, that committee worked pretty damn well for the Panthers in an upset win over the Rams. So where are we at from a fantasy standpoint on Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard?
I'm not going coping corner. Don't worry. This one's just total panic, but I definitely think it deserves total panic here because like they're saying, we've gone back now to this situation where we're not going to know who the right guy to play is every single week. And I think in this game, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Rico Dowdle got a little banged up early. He missed some time. He came back into the game and he returned and kept playing, but that might have factored in a little bit here, but also just Chuba Hubbard looked good. He looked like the faster back. He looked like old Chuba Hubbard. And that's why I mentioned earlier, is this a scenario where he rushed back because he saw Rico Dowdle putting up 200 yards a game and was like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job, rushes back from the injury, was clearly not the same guy, wasn't as fast, ends up losing his job because of that. And now Dowdle's picked up some injuries along the way. Hubbard's getting a little healthier. And we're right back to this thing being a hot hand committee. And like you said, why wouldn't they continue this? If that's how they performed, they're probably going to keep going. And I'm still going to keep Dowdle as the higher ranked of the two this week. But you move him down into like RB2 territory, even low end RB2 territory. And Hubbard becomes a pretty enticing, pretty intriguing RB3 play because at any given moment, it's almost like the Kenny Gainwell thing. At any given moment, he could outproduce the guy ahead of him on the depth chart. And let's face it, this might not continue with Rico Dowdle above him on the depth chart because if Chuba keeps playing this way and Dowdle looks the way he did, I think Chuba could overtake him again. Like this will change. This will go back and forth. I don't think they're married to one guy as the starter. So from a fantasy perspective, incredibly frustrating. Again, at a time of the year when you've potentially leaned on Rico Dowdle all season long. I will speak from experience. I got a bunch of Rico Dowdle teams. You've had Rico Dowdle all year long, been a top 12 fantasy option in a bunch of those games, and now you're going to have to basically replace him if you can find a better player, if you can find a top 20 option or so. I think we're at that point.
Yeah, definitely frustrating, but it's the reality of the situation here in that Chuba Hubbard, like, yeah, he had that explosive play. That's how how they originally wanted this to go. Like in the first game back with Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard, they kind of went drive by drive with these two backs, and it just Rico Dowdle was the hot hand and Chuba Hubbard was the super duper cold hand. And I think Rico's going to still be involved. He had 21 touches in this game last week. He had more touches than Chuba Hubbard. And I think they're going to try to get both these backs as many touches as possible, but they're not going to always be in that game script that we saw against the Rams and they come out of their week 14 bye. I think both are still fantasy starters. They're guys that you can play and feel pretty good about. And you're just going to have to hope that whichever one you play, and this does suck for people like Adam who have both of them. I never like having two backs from the same team. I get it. If you had Chuba Hubbard, you go pick up Rico Dowdle. I never like getting in this situation because you can then end up with There's going to be no indication going into a week that, oh, this is Chuba Hubbard's week and this is Rico Dowdle's week. It's going to happen within the flow of the game, no matter how much the hindsight bros want to like victory lap afterwards that they predicted this, that, or the other. It just is going to be a drive-by-drive committee with these two players, and I think that will probably be the case the rest of the way.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate here, like, I'm not suggesting that you have to throw Rico Dowdle on the bench. I'm saying you might look for a better option. If you had another guy, if you had a Bucky Irving or someone who was sitting on your bench that you can bring in and play over him, you can still play these guys. It just takes the ceiling down. You're not going to expect those, RB5, RB10 kind of performances from Rico Dowdle now. Yeah, it pushes him down into that RB2 range where it makes you potentially consider some other options if you had good depth on your bench at running back. So yes, it's not end of the world by any means. There are still going to be good games from these two, but the frustrating thing, and this is probably where I'm coming from, is the projections, the rankings, trying to figure out week to week which one of these guys is going to have the better game. I think that is going to be very frustrating, and clearly some fantasy managers who roster both these guys are going to be in the same boat.
All right, last one here comes in from Brock Sanderson, sends in this tweet. Did Pat Bryant pull a bye-week breakout and steal the wide receiver 2 job for Troy Franklin? Coming off a hot streak of targets, are we panicking on Troy Franklin with 3 targets? Boone, I honestly, what does Troy Franklin even do in this segment? I mean, here's the thing. I told you guys. I told you so. Okay. I never say I told you so, but I'm going to say I told you so on this one. This whole idea that Troy Franklin, he's the new wide receiver 1 simply because he was out targeting Courtland Sutton. I told you that was nonsense. All right. And he comes out of the bye week and runs fewer routes, not just than Courtland Sutton, but Pat Bryant ran more routes than Troy Franklin in the first game out of the bye. And I think Pat Bryant's good. Like, I think Pat Bryant brings more of what this team needs than Troy Franklin does. I'm not saying that Troy Franklin's a bad player. He has bad moments, but he has some good moments too. He's got some utility here. But this is like exactly what I said was going to happen here, is that Troy Franklin is going to be, he's not a locked in, wide receiver 1 on this team. It's all part of the kind of committee of the this is good. Actually, good work by Sleeper there. It's part of the committee around just this wide receiver room, which honestly, even Courtland Sutton, a little bit of a committee here too. He didn't get a lot of footballs thrown his way in a really good matchup. So I don't know, Boone, like, what's the level of panic on Troy Franklin after I just patted myself on the back rather needlessly?
I don't know if it's like the inertia of me like doing so many coping corners today is just pushing me in that direction, but I would go coping corner and it's because I heard so many people say exactly what you just brought up. That idea that, oh my God, is he contending to be the top receiver in this offense? No, he's not. This offense, like, Sean Payton loves to do this thing, right? He's very game plan specific. They love to rotate these receivers, and it would not surprise me at all if Franklin comes out and ends up being the top targeted guy in the offense next week. Wouldn't surprise me at all if it continues this way for the next few weeks and we see Pat Bryant come on even more. And for the record, Courtland Sutton, I'm pretty sure you predicted this. Courtland Sutton had a decent game this week, right? He scored a touchdown. I think he had 60-something yards, like a better performance from Courtland Sutton fantasy-wise than we've seen lately. So good to see him actually getting it done again. But yeah, I think it's just the nature of this offense. And so the coping corner aspect of this just comes down to expectations. If you thought that Troy Franklin was going to end up being, a top 20 option, I think there were people that were ranking him that way last week.
Yes.
If you thought he was going to be the number one Broncos receiver, he was going to be a top 20 guy. They had a great matchup. Didn't come through in this one. It's just a reminder that any given week, these Broncos receivers, any one of them could pop, could be the guy. And yeah, he is not somebody that needs to be locked in your lineup. He's more of that boomer bust wide receiver 3, which frankly, Courtland Sutton's kind of down in that range too now, where he's a little bit of like a touchdown or bust high end wide receiver 3. And that's just the nature of the Broncos offense.
Yeah, it's kind of where I think all these wide receivers will be. Even if Pat Bryant heats up a little bit, I think that's where he would ultimately be as well. So yeah, I'm with you on the coping corner designation for Troy Franklin. So with that, here's our final coping corner list for the 2025 regular fantasy football season. We've got entire offenses in the coping corner. Falcons, Vikings, Commanders. Wide receivers, we got Xavier Worthy, Matthew Golden, Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas Jr., Calvin Ridley, Michael Pittman, Ricky Pearsall, and Troy Franklin. Still feel a little weird having Michael Pittman in there, but I'm going to let you get away with it on that one. Running backs, I've got Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Isaiah Pacheco, and Alvin Kamara. Tight ends, just Arondé Gadsden hanging out there by himself, which is mostly just because Kyle Pitts and TJ Hawkinson are in the coping corner, but they're in their entire they're in their entire offenses over there. Quarterbacks, we've got Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, and Lamar Jackson in the coping corner. Boone, because I love extra credit, I also wanted to throw together the forgotten coping corner here. These are the players that it was just so bad that you kind of people didn't even bring them up, but they're certainly they belong in the coping corner here. I think the Steelers' entire offense belongs in the coping corner. Mostly DK Metcalf does, and the running backs are so weird that I don't know. I mean, Jalen Warren's fine, but they're kind of coping corner candidates. I also think that the Ravens passing offense, let's group Zay Flowers, let's group Mark Andrews in with those goofy tight ends there that deserve to be in the coping corner. Running backs, I had Ashton Genty and David Montgomery. I know Ashton Genty's been fine, and maybe you could tell me that I'm being too harsh here, but definitely a disappointment. And I got to have a Raider in the coping corner here. That offense has been so disgusting that somebody has to pay. Somebody has to pay for me having to watch that offense all year. So Ashton Genty's in the coping corner. He's running back 17 in points per game right now. I think that's cause enough for him to be. If we're going to have Saquon Barkley in there, I think we also have Ashton Genty in there. David Montgomery, I also think belongs in here. Evan Ingram at tight end. Bobby Wagner is the only one that doesn't know what to do with Evan Ingram on the season. And then Courtland Sutton, DJ Moore, and Jerry Jeudy I also think belong at the wide receiver position. So any reactions to my forgotten coping corner, the people that you guys just forgot to send these in as panic submissions, or maybe we forgot to wave them into the coping corner at some point, but I think they belong also with the big list that we have as well.
Yeah, I mean, I find the Sutton one funny just because I think you predicted he was going to have a good game last week. He finally did. And then you're like, yeah, we're still going to throw him in the coping corner. But based on expectations for the season, he's another one of those guys that started off really hot, looked like he might be a top 15, top 20 receiver, but really belongs more in the wide receiver 3 range. So I'm fine with that one. And there'll be more frustrating weeks with him, I'm sure. The Genty one that you went over, that one is a little bit tough. It might come down to expectations, right? And he was expected to be an RB1.
I mean,
he's more of an pick. RB2. Yeah, he's more of an RB2 for fantasy now. He's saving himself with all the receiving work that he's been getting. But I think the case to really put him in here is I think it's about to get worse. They have the Broncos, the Eagles, and the Texans the next 3 weeks. So I think some bad times are coming for Jeudy. I don't know if they're for Genty. I don't know if he's going to be able to catch enough passes to save his fantasy days there. And then, yeah, you nailed it. Evan Ingram is totally one that feels like he was in there 2 months ago. And for some reason, the slow Commanders linebackers were just able to allow him to go off in that game. But yeah, he is a solid coping corner candidate at this point. Clearly, we need more tight ends like we saw in the last graphic.
Yeah, I think I could hear an argument that I'm being too harsh on Ashton Genty. Totally fair. But, I mean, again, I think it's been a really disappointing season for him relative to expectations. Not crushing you, but just relative to expectations. I think you kind of had to come to terms with that and cope quite a long time ago. So that's what the coping corner is, coming to terms with it. And, yeah, Courtland Sutton, I said this on the recap show. He should have – if he had more targets in that game last night, I'd feel better about him. But, yeah, I still think there's going to be games where he scores 2 points because he catches one pass for 10 yards, given that usage in this offense. Nothing really changed, even though he dunked on the Commanders. Everybody dunks on the Commanders. All right, we're going to take our last break. When we come back, Justin Boone gives us his players to pick up off the waiver wire heading into this week's slate of games. We'll get into that right after this. All right, we're back. It's time to get into the waiver wire selections this week. Boone, we're going to go position by position here. I always feel like let's start with quarterbacks, and you're never excited to talk about these guys.
Yeah, please don't tune out if you are listening right now, because this is not a fun position to go over here. Yeah, there's a lot of good players coming up, not so much in the quarterback section, but we do have to cover it. There's 4 teams on bye this week. We got some injuries. People might be looking for QBs. The guys I'm going to highlight here: Trevor Lawrence versus the Colts, Sam Darnold versus the Falcons, CJ Stroud at the Chiefs, and Marcus Mariota at the Vikings. And that one obviously has a little asterisk because that's depending on whether Jaden Daniels comes back or not. We already talked about Trevor Lawrence, just not a great fantasy play most games, just beat up on the Titans. They have some weapons there for him. Brenton Strange being back now, BTJ being back. They obviously picked up Jacoby Myers. So even though Parker Washington's got this hip thing, Trevor Lawrence could have an okay game. I just wouldn't expect a huge performance from him. Sam Darnold, the Vikings, his old team, they had his number last week. I know the Seahawks rolled in that game, but they really gave Darnold a hard time. He had a bad performance in that one. But overall, he's been good on the year, and I think he could bounce back indoors against the Falcons. CJ Stroud, this is where it gets really rough. And sadly, CJ Stroud is the guy that I wrote up in my column because unlike the other two that I just mentioned, he is under 50% rostered. So he's available in a bunch of leagues, but just a guy that you're kind of playing and hoping that some of these young players in the offense and hoping that Nico Collins can get through, because at the Chiefs is not a good matchup. But as you go further down, it gets worse than that. So believe me, Stroud is a guy that we're going to target here. And then Marcus Mariota, we saw what he just did in a pretty tough matchup, right? And it took until the end of the game to really get going there, but finishes with 294 yards, 2 touchdowns, 55 rushing yards. That's what he can give you. He can be that kind of Jaden Daniels light in this offense. And against the Vikings, it is a tough matchup. But like I said, he just had a tough matchup and he came through in that one. So the rushing ability gives him a fairly high floor. He's a decent streaming option as well.
Yep. Mariota would be the one I'd be excited about if there's no Jaden Daniels. All right, let's move to running backs here because I don't think we need to spend too much time on those quarterbacks.
I'm glad you didn't keep us there much longer. Good stuff. All right, so for running backs, another guy that is totally dependent on someone else potentially coming back from injury, that's Bam Knight on the Cardinals. He goes up against the Rams this week. Not a great matchup, of course, but it's going to come down to whether Trey Benson is going to play or not. Trey Benson, very weird last week where he returned to a limited practice, seems like he was going to have a chance to play, and then went DNP the next 2 days. So I don't know if he had a setback. There really hasn't been an update on this one. Hopefully he didn't have a setback that keeps him out longer here. Hopefully they just saw what he could do in that first practice and said, okay, you're not ready yet. We're going to give you another week. But really got to pay attention to that. But if you look at Knight, like since week 6, he's been the RB27 in fantasy points per game, played at least 40% of the snaps in every contest during that span. He's still splitting time with someone else, whether it's Amari DeMercado, who's hurt right now. More recently, it's been with Michael Carter, who also is an option. You could play him as kind of a risky flex. But Knight is somebody you could play as that RB3. You hope he finds the end zone. This week, he actually caught a touchdown, which I don't think anyone would have predicted, but he's gotten a decent amount of passing work here. And he's continuing to be the goal line option. So he's a guy that you could look to. Chris Rodriguez Jr., who we spoke about before he went on bye, he comes back from bye. And if you were thinking that Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt was going to get that post-bye rookie bump, it did not happen. It was still a committee. He did still get some work. But yeah, he is just not a part of their plans. They gave him a chance earlier in the season, and they did not like what they saw clearly. And now we're looking at Chris Rodriguez as the lead back in that committee. And even in a tougher matchup, he delivered with like his 4th straight usable fantasy performance, I would say, like 41 yards and a touchdown. Really, that touchdown doing a lot of heavy lifting, but that comes after he posted 65 yards and a score against the Seahawks. He had a touchdown against the Lions, had 85 yards on 16 touches against the Dolphins. So Chris Rodriguez just kind of keeps producing here, and not somebody that is going to win your week, but another one of those RB3 flex options, and you hope he finds the end zone and can give you a little bit more. He also, we mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the Commanders, he also has that date with the Giants in the first week of the fantasy playoffs. So if there was ever going to be a spiked week, that might be the one for Chris Rodriguez. And then we start to get into like the backup running backs that you want to stash. Blake Corum here going up against the Cardinals this week. And Kyren Williams, he suffered an ankle injury in that game. He left. I think he went to the locker room. There was some serious concern on Sunday that like Kyren might miss some time, but he came back. He finished the game. Ankle injuries can always swell up, within 24 hours after the game. They could still be a problem, so we'll keep an eye on that one. But regardless, Corum's continuing to do what he's done more often than not this year, which is give you some flex production, and he ended up having a pretty good game in this one. Even in a complimentary role, 55 scrimmage yards 3 times in his last 5 games, including this past week. So he's giving you that flex production, while also if something happens to Kyren, Corum would just be a top 10 fantasy back immediately. He would be a guy that you'd be so happy to have on your roster. So go and get him before an injury happens. And, we saw that scenario last week, but we've been bringing up Corum forever, Harmon. Like, he's still only 16% rostered. Does not make sense to me. He should be rostered everywhere. And then if you want to talk about backups, Brian Robinson Jr., he's 25% rostered right now. 49ers are going on bye. We mentioned their great schedule in the fantasy playoffs. We do not want to see Christian McCaffrey get hurt, but if Christian McCaffrey got banged up, another guy, this would be a player that we'd be looking at as a top 10, top 12 fantasy back in that 49ers offense. Go and get him, especially if people are dropping him this week. Go and pick him up, put him on your bench just in case, just a break glass in case of emergency kind of play.
Blake Corum 16% rostered. It's like just crazy, man. I mean, come on. Like, this guy needs to be on rosters everywhere. He is a guy that you can play. He's got usability and it's like some standalone value. It's a little bit what the heck flex-ish, but saw him get in the end zone recently. Like, that's obviously big. And again, like, if Kyren Williams misses this next week's game, which we have no idea at this point here on Monday, but he did have that ankle injury, he would be an immediate fantasy starter. So come on, like 16% rostered. All the other leagues are asleep at the wheel. Again, I do want to keep saying this. We're going to do maybe next, I think we should probably do it next week after the games. Do like a backup running back ranking, and he would be very high up for me, would Blake Corum, as would Brian Robinson Jr. He's another guy that I realize you can't start him, but you want him on your bench just in case, knock on freaking wood, that anything happens to Christian McCaffrey. Let's get to wide receivers because this is a pretty interesting group of players here.
Love seeing Adonai Mitchell's face there. This is great news that we finally have reason to put him here. Yeah, it's not just my fandom. It's actually, there's a real reason to put him in this graphic. He's going up against the Dolphins. Jaden Higgins, who we talked about last week, he's at the Chiefs. Jaden Reed versus the Bears. We're still waiting for him to come back from his injury. Hopefully he's going to be back soon. And then Isaac Tesla versus the Cowboys. And there's other guys we could mention, like Christian Watson, 53% rostered. So he's like just above that cutoff. He would be the number one guy on this list if he's available in your league. Alec Pierce, 56% rostered. Another guy that would be above all these four. And Chris Godwin, 55% rostered. And like I said, I thought he looked a lot better and maybe starting to get a little healthier. He's somebody that you can consider as well. But focusing on these four guys, A.D. Mitchell, I mean, last summer, we'll bring it up again. Last summer at the Fantasy Football Expo, we were on a panel. We got asked the question, who's that player you die on a hill for? This was my answer. This was the guy. And it took him leaving the Colts. It didn't happen for him in Indy. But now he's getting this opportunity with the Jets to, at least while Garrett Wilson's out, be their number one receiver. And man, did he come through, right? 19 targets over the last 2 games here. In week 12, that only resulted in 2 catches for 42 yards, but we still saw something in that game. And then this week, over 100 yards, scores a touchdown. We're not going to expect that from him every single week. I don't need to put that caveat on it. He is not going to produce like that in every game, but he has that kind of potential, and we finally got to see it there. So that was great. I'm keeping him in like the wide receiver 4 flex option range, but he is certainly a player that I think should be picked up. And like I said, at least until Garrett Wilson comes back, we're going to see him produce, and he's going to have a chance to put up these boom weeks. And then once Garrett Wilson comes back, if Garrett Wilson comes back, he will still have some value as the number 2 in that offense. And it's great that we're seeing Tyrod Taylor under center because it's given some of these pass catching options a chance to show what they can do. And they weren't getting that opportunity with Justin Fields out there. Jaden Higgins, we don't really have to talk about again. It's a lot of the same stuff that we said last week, right? He's doing pretty well. He's starting to come on a little bit. He's starting to play a little bit more, at least 55 yards or a touchdown in 5 of his last 6 outings. Been the wide receiver 36 during that stretch. So you could start to look at him as a wide receiver 3 flex option. I'm still viewing him as a wide receiver 4 flex, but he has some upside, certainly. Jaden Reed, it's just going to be whether he can come back and be healthy. We don't have to go through the whole thing again about him, but there have been stretches during his career where he has been a top 24 fantasy receiver for fairly long stretches. We even saw it last year at the beginning of the season. And then the second half of the year, he completely fell off. So let's get him back. Let's see if he's healthy, has some fresh legs, and can get out there and actually do something. Of all the guys we're mentioning here, like ceiling wise, he has a huge ceiling. If he comes back and he's healthy,
Absolutely.
even though he kind of plays that limited role in their offense, he still could have a really big one. And then Isaac Tesla, this is coming down to the Amon-Ra St. Brown injury. Concerned about that one. Could it cause him to miss? They play on Thursday, so even though they played on Thanksgiving, you would think they'd have the extra time for him to heal up. Nope, they're just playing 1 week later against the Cowboys. And we've seen he hasn't done much. Normally we don't talk about receivers who, have only had one 35-yard game in their career, which just happened, of course.
6 catches.
But he scored touchdowns, right? So it's good. It's good that we're seeing him do something. I think he's flashed a little bit, and he's a player that you could look at least a streamer this week.
Yeah, no, Isaac Tesla, definitely a streamer candidate if Amon-Ra St. Brown does not play. He had some work in the slot as well. He ran the same amount of routes in the game as Jameson Williams did when Amon-Ra St. Brown went down, did Isaac Tesla. And I think he's got some talent. He's definitely a raw player, but I charted him for reception perception as a prospect, and not like no college production, not a lot of college production, not a lot of stats to deal with there, but showed some skills, obviously a true legitimate freak show athlete with high-end athletic comparables. So I think Dan Campbell likes him. I think he'll get involved on some of those crossers, the in-breakers. We saw that in very small glimpses against the Packers on Thanksgiving as well. So definitely someone that I think is in contention, in discussion in that game. And I'll just note on Adonai Mitchell here, route participation, 64%, 85%, jumped up to 98%. In these 3 games with the Jets. Like, he's trending up. He's been targeted on at least 24% of his routes in all 3 of those games, culminating with a 30% target per route in this past game. So this is definitely not a fluke. He's a talented player that I loved Aaron Glenn talking about it after the game too. Like, this guy's not a throw-in. Like, we wanted this guy here. He said he went to high school with one of his kids. Like, he's been following this guy's career for a while. And A.D. Mitchell needs that type of belief because he's a little bit of a wayward soul. And I think having that belief from the head coach, it's empowering for your guy, A.D. Mitchell. And I think if Jaden Reed doesn't come back, I do think Dontavian Wicks is not completely chasey to add him in an emergency situation as well, because I like the role he has in this Packers receiver room.
Yeah, I had Wicks listed in the waiver wire column as well. Of course, people can go check that out and read the full column, which not only has these players, but a bunch of others, and they're all valued there in different categories. Let's jump to tight ends here. It's kind of boring as well. There's good players, don't get me wrong, but it's just the same names that you've seen every week,
guys,
right? Colston Loveland, Brenton Strange, Harold Fannin, Darren Waller. Loveland is producing. We knew last week was going to be a down week against the Eagles. That was a tough matchup. But if you look at this player, this guy looks like he is going to be a star, Harmon. He is playing very well. He's a good pass catcher in a good offense. I can't wait to see what he's going to do in his career. Brenton Strange, 2 games now. This week it wasn't as big yardage-wise, 45 yards, but he scored that touchdown to put him over the top. And that's the thing I said last week, which was he just needs to start scoring some touchdowns, and that could move him into the tight end 1 conversation. He's there now. He's potentially a top 12 option. Harold Fannin, every week. He's just one of those staples of this. And then Darren Waller's an interesting one where he comes back this week. He doesn't find the end zone, which he did a bunch with his first few games with the Dolphins, but 47 yards this week. And again, that's not a bad day for a tight end. We're going to see him find the end zone in the future. So those are all, I think, really good options at tight end, guys. And I mentioned last week, we did one of the bold predictions, and I said Darren Waller could potentially be a top 8 fantasy tight end the rest of the way. I stand by that. I still think he could do that. We'll see some more touchdowns from him. So all those guys are pretty good plays for fantasy.
If you had to pick up one and start this week, who would it be between those 4 guys?
It would be in the exact order that I have them there. It would be Loveland first, even though I think some people might rank Strange higher. But for me, it's still Loveland. I'm chasing that talent, and he's been producing pretty well, even though he hasn't had a huge game since that massive 188-yard game or whatever it was like a month ago. But he's still been producing all along the way, with the exception of that tough matchup.
He looks awesome. Looks like he's going to be a future stud, does Colston Loveland. Speaking of stud, speaking of awesome football player, your deep stash of the week. Look at that.
It's not even the first time. Not even the first time that we've mentioned him in this deep stash section.
Let me have it. Shut up.
Jalen Coker, right? Over 50 yards, 2 of the last 3. And he's a bit of a sneaky pickup as well because they're going on bye this week, right? He just had a really good game, 4 for 74 and a touchdown. Now they're going on bye, so people might not be looking at him on the waiver wire. You could grab him. Let's see when they come back in week 15 if he can keep this up. But both of us have said this guy could be the number 2 receiver in this offense and can produce, and I hope he continues to get that chance.
Oh, that touchdown he had was so sick. Lined up as the isolated receiver, press man coverage win, 4th down. Jalen Coker, baby. Come on down. Yeah, but I mean, zip it, okay? You know, we did tell the people that we've had him as his deep stash before. We're excited about Jalen Coker. It was really cool to see that game against the Rams. I agree. Deep stash candidate Jalen Coker. I hope they continue to get him involved. They need him to be involved because he looks like a good football player, and they need some more good football players there in Carolina. All right, Boone, hell of a show. That does it for the Coping Corner. First season in the books, pal.
Yeah, man, it's been a great one. I feel like it did take me a little while there to get down the Coping Corner idea, but I think I got a good handle on it. And man, did we put a lot of guys in the Coping Corner today.
To be fair to you, the definition of this segment has always been a little bit of a moving target. Even at times today when we were looking over some of the candidates for the show, I actually thought to myself, have we jumped the shark on what it means to be in the Coping Corner? Who really knows? You know what? Doesn't matter. We're not doing the segment again for the rest of the season. Maybe we'll do it again next year. Maybe we won't. Who knows? What I do know is that was a hell of a show. Shout out to Justin Boone. Make sure you read his waiver wire column on the website because we're reading again in 2025. And speaking of again, we are going to be back again tomorrow on Tuesday. Ray Garvin joins me for another edition of the Data Dump as we get you ready for Week 14. That's going to be live right here on YouTube at 5 p.m. Eastern. Until then, we are out.